I want to welcome everyone to the second event of the celebration of DOAJ 20 years. We have chosen the theme Global. The event will be about global differences, equity, diversity, inclusion when it comes to open access publishing. And we want to highlight the many changes and activities, experiences that open access brings worldwide. We're extremely happy to have several of our DOJ ambassadors speaking today, but we also have a number of speakers from various parts of the world. So our ambassador program is one of our things that falls under global. It started in Greece in 2016, very appropriately, because many things started in Greece, especially cultural things. We were financed by a grant from the Canadian IDRC. Here in the taverna in Vamos on Crete, we started with about 12 ambassadors from various parts of the world. It was a very peculiar spot to start training and to start our program. We chose to do the training sessions in the taverna, actually. It is called Chazumeri. There were no rooms large enough to accommodate all of us in the houses that we were in this village. So we found the owner of the taverna very forthcoming. And we were able to do all these trainings in his taverna. In the evening, the taverna turned into a meeting place again, and we could also profit of that. His wife was an excellent cook. It was a unique experience, a very nice spot to get together, and it meant a lot for the future success of our program. The name Casumeri means waste of time, but it was certainly not a waste of time. So where did we go from there? Today, we list about 20,000 journals, and 20 years ago, we started with 300 journals. And the journals are from all parts of the world. Open access has grown enormously. When looking at the world map, you see that parts of the world are not very well covered by the DOAJ, especially Africa. And also the other indexes like Scopus, Web of Science don't cover Africa very well. There are, however, a lot of journals in Africa. And the DOAJ has decided to allocate more resources to get more journals from Africa listed in the index, notably from Nigeria and Ghana, because Africa is not a country. It's a very, very big continent with many countries, and you have to start somewhere. There has been a considerable success of the whole DOJ ambassador program, especially in Indonesia and also in China. We have now 80 languages and journals count 20,000, and it's coming from all parts of the world. Especially important to say is that many journals are in local language only. And we really want to promote local language journals because people tend to be able to communicate in their own language much better, writing and also reading. We think also that equality is an important factor to go for equity, because if people are going to publish their work in a journal, submit it, and a priori people think, oh, they are from Indonesia, Africa, so it will not be very good. That is something about equality. Everyone should be treated equal. So we have come a long way in the past 20 years. Comparing the DOAJ database with Scopus and Web of Science, you can see that we list more open access journals than either Scopus or Web of Science. And in fact, we list almost 10,000 journals that are not in Scopus or Web of Science. It means that we give a lot of visibility to journals that are not visible through the other indexes. Without further ado, I just want to pass the mic to Ivonne Lujano, who is one of DOAJ's ambassadors and who will lead the rest of the session and introduce the speakers. I wish you a very informative and pleasant day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tom, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining this global event, and free to say hello and to comment our comment box. I am very happy to host this event because it's a very nice way to celebrate the DOAJ along with all of you, part of this community. And I am very happy also to share the mic with so interesting and informative speakers who are share their talks. So I just want to say a couple of things about the theme of this webinar, Global. And Tom already said, this webinar will be around global, which means diversity, which means equity, which means the participation of a global community, of a community. I just want to, I feel global is being used as a buzzword, right? As a word to say, okay, we are doing good, but global has contradictions, has bright and dark sides, also have different challenges. And I think the DOAJ has embraced these challenges across the time. And we are very happy to also those challenges in front of us. Also, it is very important to acknowledge that global, among these contradictions, also means that there are certain parts of the world that with a colonial past that interpret and embrace the word differently. The DOAJ is very aware of this, and also it's all the time trying to avoid this neo-colonial approach of global. So again, this vision means dialogue, means exchange, means diversity, and we are very happy to have you all here. So our webinar will be divided in two blocks. We will have participants from different parts of the world. Some of them are our ambassadors, part of our ambassadors. Each one of them will have 8 minutes. So they will present their speeches, their topics. And then after the first block of the first speakers, we will have a Q&A session, a Q&A block. So I invite you to drop your questions in the Q&A box down below. And also you can use the chat, as I see you are already doing. I'm very happy to see all these interactions here. And we will have this Q&A session, and then we will continue with the other speakers. Some will join remotely or via a recorded video. And at the end, we will have another Q&A session, and then we will wrap up. So having said that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Saurabh Khanna. Saurabh is a junior research fellow at Pembroke University of Oxford. He completed his PhD in education policy and computer science at Stanford University, where he was a fellow at the Institute of Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence and a scholar at Stanford Data Science. Saurabh's research revolves around information and quantifying incompleteness in information searches on the internet, as well as assessing the effects of consistently consuming incomplete information at scale on human behavior. Welcome, Saurabh, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne, and thanks for giving me a chance to speak at this event. So I will be speaking about our study with the Public Knowledge Project, which is called Recalibrating the Scope of Scholarly Publishing. This has been a study with a lot of co-authors, and I'm not the only one, but I will be presenting on our team's behalf. So I'll start with some current narrative around this topic, which is that a few studies in the past 2 or 3 decades have said many things. One of them is that too much research is being published. There are estimates which suggest that around 30,000 journals have been publishing around the world. There's talk of overpublication, which leads to pressure on top journals, leads to low quality or so-called predatory publishers. And there is also conversation of calling universities, and especially in the global south, as peripheral universities, which are considered to be dependent on some central institution for direction. Our study motivation came from trying to challenge these ideas. We felt that there's a need to decentralize academia from its Western focus. And despite the challenges that many resource-scarce countries face in publishing research, there is still a lot of open source publishing platforms that are letting this research go out very effectively. And this is the narrative that our study is going to present. So the data that we are using for this analysis comes from Open Journal Systems, or OJS, which is a software released by PKP, or the Public Knowledge Project. We use data from 2020 in our paper, where we see that there's at least 25,000 journals publishing actively, which means that they publish 5 or more articles per year. And taken together in 2020 itself, we saw that these active journals had published around almost 1 million articles, and a total of 5.4 million articles since their beginning. And all this data is public with our paper for anyone to replicate our analysis. I'm going to talk about 3 dimensions of diversity of research in here. So the first one is geographic diversity. One of the things that we were stuck by in the beginning was that we saw that a lot of research was being published, especially in countries that are not the United States and not Western Europe. So you see like a lot of journals in Latin America, a lot of them in South Asia, a lot of them in Southeast Asia. So 80% of them, I think, were in middle and low income countries in our analysis, which was striking to us. The second thing was we saw that among the top few countries that we have, Indonesia was one of the countries standing out, which is not surprising given the fact that we have seen Indonesia top open access publishing charts in the last few years. And this is an article that came out in Nature 3 years ago. Moving on to another dimension of diversity, which is based on language, we saw that these journals were publishing research in at least 60 languages. And we still saw that the majority of the articles, around 50%, were being published in English. But it's still very diverse compared to platforms like Scopus, where more than 90% articles are being published in English. And this is the distribution of languages in our data. And another thing that was interesting was that we saw that around half the languages were having articles published in at least 2 or more languages, which was very interesting to us. And it calls into question our assumptions around considering English as the language of science. The third dimension that I want to talk about is the diversity around disciplines. So we saw that all this research coming from largely the global south countries, multiple languages, it's not just a single discipline. The research was related to social sciences, it was related to STEM, and a smaller chunk of humanities research as well. And this is a more granular breakdown. You see that medicine is coming out at the top, and then we have some social science fields and then STEM fields, and there's a good mix in there in terms of disciplinary diversity. Now, since we have looked at these three dimensions of diversity, we wanted to now understand how much of these journals, which are in the Global South, how much of them are being visible to researchers in mainstream indexes. So if we look at the last column in this table, this is a table from our paper. This relates to the percentage of OJS journals included in these general mainstream research indexes. What's striking to us is that the Web of Science only includes 1% of these journals, so only roughly around 2,000 to 2,500. Scopus has around 7%. The newer ones like Dimensions and OpenAlex have largely a better representation. Google Scholar has around 88% because we have been working with them to improve the representation of these journals. So that was one thing. Another thing to look at this table is that despite claims that research from countries which are not regularly publishing research as per the previous conversations, there's not a lot of research that's overlapping with predatory lists. So we only see 1% overlap of these journals with the so-called predatory journal lists. So taking everything together, I want to end with some reflections. The first one is that estimates of global journal numbers are often significantly understated because we are seeing around 25,000 journals using open journal systems itself. So there's bound to be a lot more. Another thing is that we cannot dismiss this diverse global research as predatory because we do not have proof based on the data that any of this research is not of high quality or not going through regular peer review. And a recalibration is necessary here. We see significant bibliodiversity here. We see 136 countries, 80% of them from the Global South, publishing research in at least 60 languages in many disciplines. And this is still a preliminary step. I want to acknowledge that. And we have many unanswered questions at this stage because it's new analysis. But at the same time, I also want to say that we have a much more global, diverse, and inclusive world of scholarly communication, which is already underway for our benefit. And we need to both acknowledge and encourage that. And I want to end with the link to our paper. And here's the QR code if you want to scan it and read the results in more detail. And thanks again to the DOAJ team for a chance to speak at the event.
Thank you, Saurabh, for these remarks. I think it is very, very important to highlight, you already said, about the predatory lists and all these controversies about the inclusion of the knowledge from everywhere in databases. That's something that matters, and for the DOAJ definitely matters. So our speaker is Josie Caplehorne. Josie is the Research and Innovation Support Manager, Culture and Governance at the University of Kent. She is an experienced higher education professional with over 10 years of working across research and scholarly communication support, management and information systems, curation and discovery, and equality, diversity, and inclusivity. She was recently hunted and successfully completed a secondment as and information system manager with Research and Innovation Services. She is also a staff Disability Network co-chair and Equality, Diversity, and Inclusivity representative. Outside of Kent, she is an invited member of the Publisher Accessibility Action Group and the National Association of Able Staff Networks. Welcome, Josie, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my topic today is on the somewhat and infrequently controversial element of open access denied. There can often be a perception and a correct perception that open access widens access for readers to quality work without fees. And it's gone a huge way, especially over the last 10 years, in improving access and equity in the publishing landscape and the access landscape for readers. However, much of the content in there that is inaccessible by design means that many people are not going to be able to access those works in ways that are meaningful to them. And that essentially means that they are rendered behind a paywall for the sake of a useful comparison with the earlier publishing models. And that really, without doing more work to transform the accessibility of documents for people who rely on alternative formats, these works may as well be behind a restrictive paywall in the long term. So what do I mean by alternative formats? These are accessible digital files that can be more easily transformed into meaningful alternative formats. So it may be that somebody is taking a typical written document, maybe in a PDF format or a Word format or other written digital content, and they are choosing to use that through something such as text-to-speech technology, where they can listen to the work being read aloud to them. And to define accessible, it just means that we're making something that can be used and not just accessed by everyone. So yes, open access is open to everyone, but it can't necessarily be accessed and used in a meaningful way by everyone. But it's not all doom and gloom, and that sounds like a slightly negative start, but there's so much we can do to actually do work ourselves and to be responsible for our actions so that we can create more open access works that can be truly used by everybody. So these next few slides are going to take you through some of the things that you can do. There's quite a lot of detail in here, and I'm mindful that it might seem a bit like information overload, but access to the slides is provided via a link at the end, and this is very much to be used as a document that you can use as instruction and guidance in your future if you wish to. So one of the first things that can be done is to look at the design and layout. And these matter because they are the building blocks of an accessible document, presentation, web page, blog, or social media post. And this, for example, when using text-to-speech technology, somebody listening to a printed work, means that it will be read aloud in the right order for them and in a meaningful way. So some things we recommend are to left align text and do not center or justify. See, there's a Western bias on the left alignment. It might be that right alignment is needed. And of course, for languages that rely on text in columns from top to bottom, there will be alternative approaches that will need to be explored. The use of really good colour contrast. So often I see yellow text on a white background, and I mean, that's difficult for all of us, but it renders it inaccessible for many. And typically avoid using only colour to show meaning. Not everybody can see colours in the same way, and the meaning could be lost potentially by trying to communicate in that way. Number the pages in long documents so that they can be easily navigated by people who are relying on alternative formats, and avoid using document headers and footers because that content isn't necessarily picked up as well, and it's best if that's really important information to put that in the main body of the work. And try to avoid using watermarks as well. My slide doesn't seem to be clicking forward. Okay, so the next thing is text formatting. So we've got the building blocks in place, and now it's about making sure we structure the text in a way that is equally meaningful. So there's things like using inbuilt heading styles. We've got a link through to some guidance there on what that means. And rather than putting a title in and just making it bold and underlining it, using proper style headings means that the alternative formats can really understand that that is a heading and that's intended as a heading. Create selectable text. Sounds more complicated than it is. If you can copy the text you're writing and paste it into another document and it looks exactly the same, you've created selectable text. Use inbuilt style lists. So these are things like bullet point and numbering. Try not to do them manually. It just makes it easier for from an accessibility point of view. And use a minimum font size 14 as well. Non-serif fonts are really helpful for people, and that's just nice basic text without any of the extra decorative elements on them. Avoid underlining that isn't a link, avoid italics and all capital letters, and use bold text as little as possible. Hyperlinks, try to make them meaningful, and there's a couple of examples here. So we've got a meaningful hyperlink that is University of Kent Open Access Journal platform, which is nice and accessible. The not digitally accessible version are the raw URLs that you see there, or click here, because click here, where does that take us? And you can also use a QR code, and it's useful to have some text in there that explains how that should be used as well, because not everybody is used to using a QR code. Hashtags ideally could be used in what we traditionally call camel case, which makes them more readable, and that just means separating each word to start with a capital letter, because it makes it nice and easy for text-to-speech technology to pick up the differences in the words. Otherwise, it tries to read them aloud, which can be sound like gobbledygook for the best part. Makes it very difficult for people to understand. And image alt text is a really important one, which is what we use beneath the image that we're adding to describe what it is that is being communicated. So there's inbuilt functionality to do this, and text-to-speech technology, as an example, will read the description of the image aloud in the way that we have decided to describe it. Not all images need it, and that's okay. You can just mark it as decorative. So I'm going to scooch past tables because I'm aware that I'm overrunning, but there's lots of information in there to help you, and lots of guidance on how to check that your content is accessible. There's lots out there that you can use, and it's all free to use.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so sorry, it's not taking me through to the end of my slides, so I was just going to round up with the, there we go, lovely. Thank you very much. That's the scan to this presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Josie. And as the slides of our presenters will be available for you all, and thank you very much for your remarks, Josie. This is really relevant, and sometimes I think we tend to take for granted what a reader or who a reader is, and I think this leaves us with many questions and challenges about how to make our journals more accessible for people, and not just out for like traditional reader. Okay, thank you very much. And so let's move on to our next speaker. She is Gimena del Rio Riande. She's an associate researcher at the Instituto de Investigaciones Bibliográficas y Crítica Textual at CONICET, Argentina, and professor at the University of Salvador. She holds an MA and PhD in Romance Philology from Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Her main academic interests deal with digital humanities, digital scholarly, and open research in the humanities. She's director of the Laboratorio de Humanidades Digitales, HD Lab, and she coordinates a postgraduate certificate in digital humanities in Argentina. She's also one of the DOAJ ambassadors in Latin America. So, bienvenida, Gimena. Over to you.
Gracias, Ivonne. So these days, we talk a lot about multilingualism and multilingual subjects, but multilingualism is a really complex subject of study. We could study multilingualism from a sociological or a dialectological point of view. In this presentation, I will just focus on the geopolitics of multilingualism, specifically applied to the use of a language for scientific communication. Is the global publishing landscape showing us some balanced multilingualism? Have we forgotten about the 2003 UNESCO recommendation concerning the use of multilingualism and access to cyberspace? The DOAJ is a multilingual directory of open access journals, but we can't say its indexed journals show balanced multilingualism. Excuse me. There are many different explanations to this, but one, as we all know, is the intensive and extensive use of English for science since the early 20th century. Representation of Latin American journals in the DOAJ is nowadays just 20%. May I remind you that the official languages in Latin America are Spanish and Portuguese, even though only in Mexico we find more than 300 native languages. But in the DOAJ, Brazil is one of the best represented countries with 1,644 journals. Even though we find a quite high use of Portuguese, there are, as you can see, many different kinds of multilingual journals, and surprisingly, a few include very specific dialects, such as Zulu. Colombia is another country with a good representation in the DOAJ, and although as expected, Spanish is the main language for publishing, we find a really good balance between monolingual and multilingual journals, as you can see. Ecuador is a really interesting case where we find a quite equal use of Spanish and English for scientific publishing, but we also see the use of native languages like Quechua, mainly for publishing social sciences. And finally, Paraguay, a small country in Latin America with still very few journals in the DOAJ, shows a unique context. We can see a really high use of Spanish, but a more intensive use of a native language applied to scientific publishing, like the Guarani. Let's remember that Paraguay is one of the few cases in Latin America in which a native language like Guarani has been accepted as official. But what happens if we compare all these graphics that I have shown you with scientific publishing, for instance, in the USA? Well, the DOAJ shows us that this is a very monolingual landscape where multilingual journals are just 6%. So is innovation in multilingualism for scientific publishing just a case of the so-called peripheries of academic communication? Is this just a case of the Global South? Do these journals from Latin America that I have shown you choose multilingualism because they think that ethically this is the best option for their authors and readers, or because they do not want to be excluded from the global publishing landscape? I think that there is not just one answer, but let's remember, following Balula and Liao, that one of the goals of global scientific publishing industry should be not to find solutions based on, to find solutions based on balanced multilingualism and supported by digital infrastructures in which the need for communicating in a lingua franca does not necessarily imply the adoption of a lingua única. And thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Obrigada.
Thank you, Gimena. Gracias. And we invite you all to comment in the chat box, and also to ask questions to any of our speakers. You can drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we will have a Q&A session after the next speaker, who is Ikhwan. So Ikhwan Arief is a faculty member in the Industrial Engineering Department at Universitas Andalas, Indonesia. He is an enthusiastic photography hobbyist. He joined DOAJ in 2018 as an ambassador and gradually became a volunteer editor. He used to manage the university's library information system, including establishing the online public access catalog and the repository servers. He is keenly interested in data science, primarily in industrial and management systems research, being assisting Indonesian journal managers in their application and to DOAJ. Welcome, Ikhwan, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. Good evening, good day, good morning. In this session, I will present the state of Indonesian open access journals and the particular reason why we are the first in the DOAJ country list, as also mentioned by Saurabh previously. This visual representation captures the essence of the top 100 keywords associated with the Indonesian journals in DOAJ. The size of each word represents its prominence of frequency within the dataset. From this word cloud, we can quickly discern the focal areas and predominant themes of research in Indonesian open access journals. So mainly we have this education is as the main keyword that we have here in Indonesia. This histogram shows the trend over the last 30 years. Well, we are celebrating the DOAJ 20 years now. So I just present you the 20 years of Indonesian journals in publication and adopting the open license for our content. There is a noticeable increase in adoption can be observed, reflecting the growing emphasis on open access in Indonesia's scholarly community. This bar chart displays the yearly count of Indonesian journals indexed in the DOAJ. Over the years, there's been a steady rise, showcasing Indonesia's growing contribution to the global open access movement. 2017, as you can see here, 2017 is the year you can say that milestone of journal rush in Indonesia, because there is this government regulation regarding a new journal accreditation level, 27 and 2018. So all journal editors or universities, mainly universities, rush to following this government regulation. However, we do not have official regulation as a countrywide policy on open access, but we the accreditation process with its components drives our journal as open access journal. This is the main particular reason why Indonesian journals we can say the first list in the DOAJ journal. Okay, next. Sorry. Okay. Diving in. Sorry. Here you see the overlap between journals accredited by SINTA and those indexed in the DOAJ. Accredited journals are indexed in SINTA. We have nearly 90,000 SINTA index journals. 1,300 are in the DOAJ currently. Sorry, more than 100, I think. Yeah, and 18 of them are having a DOAJ seal on this particular reason. Sorry. On our licensing details, this bar chart provides insight into the types of licenses Indonesian journals typically adopt. The majority of our journals are using CBY licenses, which is facilitating maximum dissemination and reuse of their contents for this purpose. This matrix presents a relationship between journals where authors hold copyright without restrictions for Indonesian journals and those that charge an ITC. Interestingly, that there is a significant number of journals both at ATC and let authors retain the copyright, which is a balance between sustainability and author rights. The peer review is the backbone of academic publishing. This slide illustrates the various peer review mechanisms in Indonesian journals that we implemented. Dominant processes, we are using double-blind review, ensuring unbiased evaluation of submission. Okay, that is from me, and thank you for your kind attention. I will happy to answer questions. Back to you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Ikhwan. Thank you for your highlights on Indonesia. As we already discussed, or the discussed, it's a very interesting case, and I'm very happy to have you answer the questions or comment more on the case. The numbers of journals in Indonesia. I'm very happy to have you here. So speakers, our first 4 speakers, to please our cameras on, so we can Q&A session. So, and again, please to our audience, if you have questions, please drop questions in the Q&A box, so our speakers can answer your questions or comment, or you know, go in depth in case you want to ask something specifically to any of the speakers or to everyone. We have Josie. Gimena, can you please turn your camera? Okay, and also remember that you can use the chat as well to comment or to add anything that you want to ask, or that you want to comment on our speaker's presentation. So we have a question in the Q&A chat that it's around the presentations. Yeah, the materials will be available, and also let me remind you that we will have other posts after this, so we can keep and continue the conversation there. So there's a question from Son Goodwin. I hope I'm pronouncing okay. Yes, I like DOAJ. We have Journal Finder beta for DOAJ. It will help greatly. Thank you, and from Nigeria. Thank you. We will answer kind of technical questions, and we will inform you about it in a blog. For now, we don't have, but we will let you know. So Clara has a question for speakers, Gimena, for all the speakers, for Gimena and Josie. Do you think that AI can be part of the solution to include more multilingualism and to make research more accessible? I think this question it's relevant and important these days. So whoever wants, please go ahead. Yeah, Josie.
It's a really interesting question, actually, and something that I will be happy to pick up from an accessibility point of view and a wider answer in the blog. The short answer is yes. I certainly do think that AI can be used for improving digital accessibility. I think there's some way to go with that. It's still very early days. And I know that there are companies out there exploring that at the moment. So yes, I think there's great opportunity with it, but it does need more work.
And I can add to what Josie said, that of course the short answer is yes to accessibility and multilingualism, and they should go by hand by hand. But I would also remind all of us that we have recommendations on multilingualism from a long time ago, and we also have multilingualism included in the roadmap for open science. And I think that nowadays multilingualism can be also explored with many different tools, with human translators, with interpretation, but also we have the chance to explore new tools related to artificial intelligence and deep learning that can be applied to our landscape of scientific publishing. So I think we have a great chance to explore altogether multilingualism in scientific publishing.
Yeah, completely agree. And I don't know if Ikhwan or Saurabh add anything. I don't know if you have started exploring these issues within your topics, or want to add anything else to what has been said.
I think that regarding using AI for languages, one of the things that we did try was to, when you have such a large corpus of millions of articles, you have to have some kind of initial labeling using a machine learning method, which gives you the most probable language of an article. So that's something we did try in OJS. And I think as a second step, it's always useful to have a human validate those labels, because a lot of times these algorithms, especially for languages that are not well represented, like not English or not Spanish, the models do not classify very accurately. So there's need for human intervention, but you can reduce the workload by using these methods at this stage. Thanks.
Yeah, that's very good to know, because as you mentioned, many in the world use it. Yeah, so I think it's very important to start exploring this option, and also because of the advantages and the benefits of the OJS being an open source software, it's something very helpful. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. This is a question for Josie and Saurabh. From Clara. Is there style guide already added in the OJS guidelines to make journals are accessible as accessible as possible?
Not being directly from OJS itself, I'm aware that there is guidance within there. It depends on the versioning, I believe, that's being used of the software. But I think where there is guidance available, it's also down to the institutions that are hosting an open journal platform to make sure that guidance reaches their journal editors, their editorial teams, and to be ambassadors for the kind of inclusive content that needs to be created. So I think, yes, guidance there, make sure that that's being followed up on at an institutional level as well.
Yes, I agree. And I would add to that specifically for OJS, it's always useful if there's an option to select automatic security updates. So if you keep your journal updated with the recent patches, it makes sure that it's free of bugs and it stays accessible when searching for a particular article that's on your journal on the internet. And also, I think just clearly mentioning practices like peer review on your homepage, your editorial board, the APC, if it exists. So those general practices will help make it stay live.
All right. Thank you very much. That was really helpful. And so this is a question for the panel, and I think it's very specific, but I would like to invite you to share your views on this. So the question is, what is the plan of the DOAJ for open access initiative in developing countries where APC is an issue? I can say very briefly that the DOAJ actively promotes and disseminates this idea and this of the journals that are listed in the direct that don't charge any APC. So a very good percentage of the journals that are listed in the DOAJ, they're called diamond open access journals, which means they don't charge. So the DOAJ sure that everyone knows that open access is a synonym of paying for publishing. which is you know a very like common idea. So that's the part and the part of the mission of the DOAJ, about different open access ways of conceiving open access in the world. So, but I like to invite the analysts to share your views or your remarks or highlights on this. As the person said, as Siva Mai said, this issue around the world. Any thoughts on the APC issue? Yeah,
Ivonne, I think that we lost you for a while. I don't know if it was only my case or the case of the others, but maybe my reflections on what you said is that we know that there are many different models for open access, but I think that when we all speak about open access, we tend to speak about our close or our own open access context. So it is I think that we all want to talk about a global scale, but finally we become very local when we talk about open access. As we all know, the case of Latin America has always been one in which science has been funded with public funding. So this roadmap for the new roadmap called Plan S roadmap for open access for us is we're still trying to find our way there. But I would like to highlight that one of the biggest problems in this are the status or the problems of the social sciences and the humanities while facing the charge of these APCs. So I'm very glad that the DOAJ shows or offers all these clean indexed journals that do not charge APCs, because in this sense this database offers many authors or researchers from the global south that maybe cannot access paying those APCs to journals that do not charge. So I think that this is quite a global issue that it's very difficult to solve in just this webinar, but at least we have these instruments that can help us see the many different open access context or possibilities for authors to publish in this kind of journals or diamond open access journals.
Any other thoughts on this? Okay, so before I go to the next question, let me just briefly comment. We have like going back to the AI question. So in the chat, Susan Murray, who is also a speaker today, she commented here something in the chat that I will read, so the audience that will watch this video afterwards can also have these thoughts. Susan said, and you're here. If you want to open your mic and comment a little on your thoughts on AI.
Yes, I read Susan's comment, and I think that it is very accurate. I completely agree about these trained models and its dangers. About language, Saurabh also mentioned the problems that we still face and the need for human curation while working with artificial intelligence. anyway, this is the future of the web. So we should be ready for facing these problems and trying to find solutions for the problems, but also putting into practice these new technologies. There is still a lot to be done. There is still a lot of problems that we might face as these technologies, as we know, need nowadays. We don't know in the future, but nowadays they need a lot of digital resources to be carried out. And they have also shown that they also need a lot of human curation, as we were saying. But we still need to research those paths. Some consortia also have started exploring this path. I can mention operas in Europe who are doing great work on research about multilingualism and digital tools for automatic translation. So I can say that nowadays this is not a solution, but this might be a path that we can explore together to find a more multilingual landscape in the next years.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Gimena. And next question is for Ikhwan. For Abel, who is also a DOAJ ambassador. Why are there only 2,307 Indonesian open access journals in DOAJ from 10,564 Indonesian in Sinta? Can you comment on this, Ikhwan?
Yes, I'm not sure why that. Why is the reason for that? Because mainly we are open access, but maybe because the component of our accreditation is already open access, and those journals and our credit for lecturers or staffs mainly focus on Sinta index journals only. So not only, so mainly for Sinta index journals, and part of the Sinta index is DOAJ, but not all of their journals are interested in, maybe not interested in indexing their journals to DOAJ. Some of them are that I found after several events that journals, we have 30%, I think 30 or 40% of acceptance rate for Indonesian journals into DOAJ. So that is the accepted journals only. If we are multiply the applicants so DOAJ, so we can see that actually 4 times than the numbers that Indonesian journals are interested to index their journals to the DOAJ, but only 30 to 40% of those applicants are accepted to DOAJ. So this is maybe my or our homework for Indonesian associate editors and editors to ambassadors to gain more Indonesian journals into the DOAJ, because we have almost 9,000 journals for index in Sinta. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ikhwan, and maybe a good reminder to our audience, if there are some editors here, publishers who are interested in indexing their journal DOAJ, just to let you know that we have a team of professionals and experts in the library science, information sciences, who are happy to help you with the applications and also to assess the applications and give you recommendations in case your journal is not accepted, but you can improve some practices and so on. That's one of part of the mission of the DOAJ. We have only 2 more minutes, and then the last question of this blog is for Josie from Lina. Does Josie have any recommendations for DOAJ or other platforms, I would say, to ensure it is accessible to everyone?
From a DOAJ point of view, I think they're making great strides with this, but I think there's a few things that would be really helpful. Having taken 2 journals recently through the process to request to be included in DOAJ, it would be really good if a question was asked about the accessibility of the journal content, and asking that direct question to editors. So there is more awareness being built up in that community. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mandatory feature, but it's certainly a question that would be really helpful to ask. For those applying for the DOAJ seal, for that slightly heightened sense of integrity of the journal, it would be really good to see that planned for the future as something that is a mandatory requirement for a DOAJ seal. And it would be really good, I think, as well, which would be much harder to do, which I do appreciate, is to enable users to be able to search on content that is known to be digitally accessible and that can be used in alternative formats. As I say, I recognise that that would be very difficult to do, but there are just some of the things that could go some way to improving the landscape for users.
Thank you very much, Josie, and thank you all for your talks and for your thoughts and answers for these questions. So I invite you to stay here and please turn your cameras off so we can continue with the next speakers. Yeah, our next speaker is Susan Murray. So I'm gonna introduce her. Okay, for 16 years, has been the director of African Journals Online, an African NPO working for increased accessibility, awareness, and quality of African published research. Murray has an academic background in development and the deep commitment to the constructive role that emerging economies can play in setting equitable research agendas for their citizens' well-being by increasing the prominence of and access to relevant global South research outputs. Susan is an advisory committee member and board director of several regional and global scholarly initiatives, an experienced workshop facilitator, and a frequent conference speaker. Welcome, Susan, and over to you.
Many thanks, Ivonne. I'm going to be super quick, given only 7 minutes for a lightning talk. I usually speak a lot, so please rein me in if I go overboard. Thank you so much. I am delighted to be able to contribute. Very briefly, for those who are not familiar with us already, African Journals Online is a journal hosting platform, a non-profit organization that is run from primarily from South Africa. It's African owned and community led. We provide a very stringent assessment process for applicants of journals for inclusion to the platform. It's in line with the DOAJ criteria, globally, regionally, and nationally accepted standards of publishing best practices. We also strive to amplify the needs of developing countries as regards equity in global scholarly publishing systems. And we, as an organization, support open everything. That said, though, we do not have only open access on our platform. We have been functional since we were started as trial project by INASP in the UK in Oxford in 1998. And as such, we predate the DOAJ, our long-term partner, and we predate open access. But we do include journals that are not open access because the typical trajectory historically has been for these journals from Africa, from the whole continent, to be online for the first time through us, and then be able to flip from a print subscription basis to an open access online basis. These are some stats from our homepage. We have chosen to use not only Ghanaian, it's actually West African symbols, in order to highlight communication that is uniquely African. We actually have 700 journals on the platform right now, which might sound small in comparison to the other stats that you've heard so far, but we will explain that further. So the reason we exist is because global input is necessary to solve global challenges. The Sustainable Development Goals, for example, are in many occasions best addressed by experts who are at the cutting edge of those research issues, and many times those researchers are based in the global south. We need to realize that there are some major differences, and I apologize to people who are already aware of this very fundamental difference because of the DOAJ audience that we're capturing today and this important webinar. But to go back to very basics, what is a journal? If you are somebody who has been a lifelong educated individual based in a resource wealthy country, you will know that a journal is published by a giant commercial entity with huge resources, and the kind of behind the scenes stuff will be invisible to you because you've got a well-resourced library. However, in the global south, this solution, in the lack of massive resources, has been to create large non-profit hosting platforms for standalone journals using free and open source software. APCs are not normal either in developing countries. So that can be interrogated further if I had more time. I'm trying to get to my next slide. There is a lag. There we go. So there are also differences between global South journal platforms. In Latin America, which we've heard quite a bit about, there are several open access platforms, and they have been led by government policy supporting open access and by government funding. Within the African continent, there has been no such government support. We are a small nonprofit organization with very limited funding. We have 6 full-time staff. We support 700 journals. Estimates of the total number published from the continent vary from half of that number, double that number, to 3 or 4 times that number. We receive applications a few times a week. So the demand is huge. There are some exceptions, obviously. I'm making big generalizations on behalf of an entire continent. For example, South Africa has its own country level government-supported open access journal platform, which is funded by the South African government and is an offshoot of SciELO, which is the next presentation. I'm going to my next slide. Again, a lag. So I just want to show the difference between the open access journal downloads from our platform last year, which is the high orange in the millions, versus basically the x-axis downloads from closed journals on the platform, which have charges associated with them. Trying to get to my next slide. So UNESCO released some advice recently during the course of this year, last year, for open science. And I would like to suggest that these platforms from the developing countries as a solution to global inequities in the system of scholarly publishing are in line with this, more so than in the global north. We are very grateful to our long-term donor, CEDA, and a new one yet to be announced. But even with those, as a small non-profit organization, we have an urgent call for support. There's the link. Please do reach out to us if you are able to. As an institutional level, as the DOAJ does, we were super surprised and impressed to see that 80% of the DOAJ funding comes from institutions around the world. We would like to emulate that. We share our congratulations and warm regards to the DOAJ, celebrating 20 years of excellent work. Thank you for our long-term collaboration. Any inquiries to us can be directed to our general email address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan, and also congratulations for this initiative in Africa. And I think we are sister projects, and thank you very much for your highlights. And again, I just want to briefly comment that it's important, and what you said, go back to basics and say, well, what is a journal and what is science communication, right? Especially going back to our questions and to your comments, where APCs and all these charges are a hot topic. So our next speaker is Abel Packer. He's not here. We will share his video with his talk, and I'm gonna just briefly introduce him. Abel is director of a PESP program, former director of the Latin American and the Caribbean Center of Health Sciences Information of the Pan American Health Organization of the World Health Organization, former deputy director of the Computer Center of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has a bachelor's degree in business management and a master's of library science with extensive experience in information science, librarianship, information technology, and information management. Abel will join us for the Q&A session, but so far we will share his video. So yeah, go ahead.
In my view, represents the premier index of open access journals from around the world, covering. Thank you very much for this opportunity you are giving to me to participate in the 20th anniversary celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Directory of Open Access Journals, which, in my view, represents the premier index of open access journals from around the world, covering all disciplines and languages. From my knowledge, beyond the web browsers, DOAJ is probably the most diverse bibliographic index. It is a key component of the global research communication infrastructure, especially for advancing open access to scientific literature. DOAJ promotes quality control, which ensures our confidence in open access journals that are increasingly democratizing access to scientific knowledge. This year, our Cielo program is celebrating 25 years of regular operation under the vision of open science with idea, impact, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the next week, DOAJ and Cielo are celebrating their anniversaries. We believe we represent important achievements of and for open access modus operandi. Cielo operates a network of national collections of quality open access journals in 16 countries across 3 continents. This includes 13 countries from Latin America, in addition to South Africa, Portugal, and Spain. In addition to this 16 journal collection, the Cielo networks operating a thematic collection of public health journals, the Cielo preprint server, the Cielo data repository of research data underlying the articles, the Cielo book collection, and we are promoting the progressive opening of a manuscript peer review. In the end of 2022, the national collections of the Cielo network actively index over 1,300 journals published mainly by universities and also scientific societies and professional associations. They represent around 15% of all scientific journals published in the countries of the Cielo network. These journals play an important role in the scientific production of their countries. Many of the research they communicate have national and regional relevance. They are crucial for training researchers, advancing research, informing public policies, and the society. They are published in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. The objectives of the Cielo network is to contribute to the development of a national infrastructure and knowledge in research communication aligned with the state of art. Journals are indexing according to a set of quality criteria, with index in the DOAJ being a mandatory goal we hope to achieve in the following 2 years. Our dream is really to have most of the Cielo journals indexed as DOAJ seal. Anyway, the indexing by DOAJ serves as a reference to ensure globally that the Cielo journals are trustworthy. This function of the DOAJ is unique on a global scale and is carried out democratically and inclusively. So thank you very much to DOAJ for this critical contribution to the development of open access in general and the Cielo network in particular. Over the past 5 years, we have been promoting the alignment with the modus operandi of open science. Open science practices undoubtedly lead to better research, greater democratization of access to research results, and the higher quality and the more reliable journals. But it is posing us a tremendous challenge because there is still much unknown, resistance, and difficulty in adopting preprints, sharing research data, and increasing transparency in peer review. The DOAJ, which has been essential for advancing open access, will be also indispensable in the near future for promoting the alignment of journal with open science, supporting developments like we are doing in the Cielo network. So, congratulations to all those that contributed to build the DOAJ and its critical role in research communication. Congratulations to Joanna Ball and her.
All right. As I mentioned before, Abel will be here for the Q&A session, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or in the QA box. And our next speaker also is not able to be here, but we will share his video as well. So Google is the head of Technology Information Policy at the National Science Library at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He's also a researcher on open science and knowledge organization. His research interests include the development of open science and the development of data science in the fields of science, education, culture, and sports. Gu Liping is also a member of several organizations, such as the Academic Committee STC, Springer Nature, Open Science, Joint Laboratory, COAR, Multilingual and Non-English Content in Repositories. He's also the vice chairman of the Academic Committee of the Chinese Youth Development Federation. So we'll share his video, and again, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box.
Hello, my name is Gu Liping, works in the National Science Library, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Today we are pleasure to introduce the China and Open Access. China and Open Access. Here is the monographic with the title Open Access Publishing in China 2022. I was one of the authors. At first, we would like to compare the number of open access articles between the world and China. Open access article publishes globally from 2011 to 2021. Here we can find out all the publications is increasing rapidly. And here is the data from Web of Science. Now, when we see the China, the publishers in the Web of Science listed journals, we can look out and we can find out the difference, because China in the recently 10 years published a lot of golden open access article. It is more increased 70 countries than before. Now we see the historical reviewing the China Open Access movement. There are 3 million from the science paper online, this journal public patents, and during the 20 years open access practice. Finally, in the 2021, the law of the People's Republic of China in scientific and technological progresses revises in December 2021 require the promotion of the development of open sciences, including the Open Access Journal and the China Journal into more high quality and the international valuable. So here is the open access history in China. Now we look at the major open access development. 2004 is a key time that the Berlin's declarations on open access to knowledge in the science and the humanities, Chinese Academy of Sciences and the National Natural Science Foundation of China signed it. 2010, the Berlin's the 8th Berlin Conference on Open Access was in the Beijing, in the Chinese Academy of Sciences, held by many China government's department. 2014, Chinese Academy of Sciences and NSC will publish their each open access policy statement. And in the Global Research Council, the China preliminary Li Keqiang, on behalf of the Chinese government, expressed the support to establish open access repository, and also publish their article in the open access journals. So now we quickly to see the topic 20 disciplination of open access article by researchers from China, and the top 20 institution publishing open access article in China. The first one is the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the University, and also including the Shanghai Jiaotong University, Tsinghua University, Beijing University. So, forwarding the open access in China, at first we focusing on the percentage of open access article from China in SCIE listed journal by quality. So for the quality analysis, we could look out. We hope that Chinese authors publish more open access article, and also with the high quality research results. Therefore, we have there is a very important plan. That is an excellent action plan of China's STM journals. There are 22 journals will select for the leading journal category, and to draft 1,500 journals, China STM journals, to improve their quality and also with the issue open access. So we expect there are more and more Chinese journals will be including DOAJ in backseat. That is our presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we can take the email. We can take the contact with the email or the other way. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to let you know, questions for Guli will follow up with a blog post afterwards. So our last speaker is Vrushali. Vrushali Dandawate. Vrushali is the head librarian at AISSMS College of Engineering, College Pune, Maharashtra, India, and she holds a PhD from Reva University, Bangalore. Her research topic is open access, e-resources development in Asia. Vrushali was the winner of the ALCTS online course grant for library professionals from developing countries in 2014 and the INASP open access competition in 2015. 2016. She was invited to OpenCon in Berlin, and she was part of the organizing committee for OpenCon in 2018 in Toronto. She was selected as an advisory committee member of Open Door and a conference committee member for the Force 11 conference, Force 2021, conference. She is ambassador in India. Welcome, Vrushali, and over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. So thank you for the opportunity. My topic is open access development in India. As Yvonne told, I'm working as a DOAJ ambassador for India. The current status of open access in India, that is, there is one community called Open Access India. It's online community for the practice with the volunteer members, and some of members are already present in this meeting. It started in year 2011 to advocate open access, open data, and open education in India. So right now, India don't have any national open access policy like China. We just saw the presentation. Open Access India community already presented a draft to the government, but it is not yet approved by government. So that work is still going on. But India is having some research organization, that is a Council of Scientific Industrial Research Organization, CSIR, Agriculture Research Organization, then Department of Science and Technology, Biotechnology, and there is one more organization, that is the UGC. So UGC follow all the rules, UGC guides all the rules and regulation for the institutions in India. So they have made that mandates that all researchers in India, they should deposit their research papers and in IR. So IITs and IISCs already following this mandate. So that is happening in India. And highlighted data like for open access journal status from India. So from DOAJ till date, 341 journals are indexed, and lot of journals are without APC charges, because APC is the biggest problem here. I will also share. But right now, 341 journals from India are indexed in DOAJ. And though, like Ikhwan was saying, that Indonesia is, a topmost country from Asia to indexed open access journal in DOAJ. But more visits are happening to DOAJ sites. This site's data is taken from DOAJ database. So 32,000 visits each month from India. It's happening. So a lot of people are following DOAJ from India. And status for the open access repositories on Open Door, 106 Indian repositories are listed. Again, there is one initiative called Shodh Ganga. There is one InflibNet center. So the center is connected with the lot of libraries all over the countries, and they made one repositories for Indian thesis. Then every PhD student should submit their PhD research, PhD thesis to the Shodh Ganga platform. So this is open access repositories, and they just index, store, and disseminate the data of thesis. So this is major open access initiative happening in India. Again, InflibNet has started for the synopsis submitted to the universities by researchers. So that is a Shodh Gangotri. So Shodh Ganga and Shodh Gangotri, both programs are initiated from InfluMnet Center in India. Then like last 2-3 years back, one more development happened, that National Digital Library of India started, and as a librarian we are following the National Digital Library of India. So they are integrating a lot of national and international digital libraries database, and many books are available in English and Indian languages. So the data is harvested and integrated on one web portal platform, and like from first standard to like postgraduate and PhD students can access lot of resources are there. So this is one good initiative started for the national level, National Digital Library of India. So apart from these are many things are going on. There are still more challenges for Indian researchers. So a major problem that is in finding APC support for open access publication, because India is under developing country, but you know like lot of journals are giving fee waiver for the developing countries author. But right now India is most of the journals, India name is not included under developing country. So right now India's situation is not in developing country, not in developed country. So like we are stuck in middle level. So major problem with the researchers. So the finding APC support for OA publications, and lot of institutes are also not supporting any OA APC charges for publications. And here it's mandatory right now. MCI, Medical Council of India, made mandatory that their journal should be indexed in DOAJ. But for the promotions of academic credits and for PhD thesis and other thing, it's mandatory for the researchers, so that their publication should be in Scopus and Web of Science. Also, there is a lot of growth of predatory publications in India. Again, ICT infrastructure is a problem, and as I said, Indian government is not yet sanctions the open access policies, and very less support from Indian government. But right now they are starting with new education policy, so we are hoping that government should implement and incorporate more open access policy in new NAP schemes. And again, internet connectivity issue is there, that is had been little bit solved. Language problem is there, because so many it's like multilingual country, so so many people they understand but cannot communicate properly, and they cannot write the research information properly. So a lot of linguistic research is going on in the local journals, so that has to be come up with proper open access platform. And there is still lack of trainings and understanding about open access among Indian researchers. So these are some challenges. So like I'm working with open access ambassador for India from year 2016. So some of my recommendations to overcome the problem is that organizing of workshops, seminars on OA, or during OA week or OA awareness work will be helpful. Then greater role for communities to the practice. So like Open Access India community, that a lot of people are already doing work. Then as a librarian, because I am also librarian, so because librarian can play role of open access advocate for their institute, because we know about open access as a librarian, so we can educate our users and even faculty members and the researchers, so how they can include open access practices in their daily research. Then also encouraging researchers to publishing with open access journals. Then creation of open access repositories, like a lot of research will be available for open, will be open for the world. And use of open format and open licenses. So these are some recommendations for India from open access point of view. And thank you. So I'm done. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thanks to you, Vrushali. And I would say that this recommendation also could apply for other countries. So thank you for that. And I would like to invite our speakers to turn your cameras on so we can have our Q&A session. Also, I would like to say bem-vindo to Abel. Abel, welcome, and please join us for the Q&A session. And Susan as well, thank you. Abel, if you are able to turn your camera on, you're welcome to do so. So this first question is from Catherine and to Susan, but I can say I would like to add this question and ask this question to Abel as well. The question goes, what does the next 5 years look like for Abel or for Cielo? Susan?
Thanks, Yvonne. The next 5 years for African Journals Online depends, unfortunately, very heavily on whether our attempts to gather resources to support our efforts are successful. We are quite fragile at the moment in terms of financial sustainability. We have a global, very accomplished, very long-term record of success. We have enforced that over many years. The need for our services is proven, and the demand is escalating. However, we don't have any public funding from within the African continent. We've tried and been unsuccessful. We are launching a new effort to try and amass small-scale annual input from institutions around the world, particularly African Studies institutes. And we're hoping that that will make a difference. That said, we are hugely grateful for our very long-term supporters from the Swedish International Development Agency, who have been basically our sole funder for a couple of decades. We have had a wonderful strategic planning, sky's the limit workshop in March this year with a number of different experts inputting, and we have a really, really good trajectory planned optimistically on the basis of increased inputs to our very small team of 6 plus 1 part-time software developer for an entire continent. Thank you for the question. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Susan. Abel, would you like to comment? And congratulations on Cielo's 25th anniversary.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I understood, I will talk briefly about what we are thinking, we're planning, we are deciding for the next 5 years. We just have a meeting of the Cielo network, which comprises 16 countries, from 3 continents, 13 from Latin America, Portugal, Spain, and South Africa. So we met during 2 days under the slogan or under the topic of open science with idea, that we call it open science with impact, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So we took a decision with the 16, really 14 coordinators that were present here, and we agreed on a declaration on support of open science with impact, diversity, equity, inclusion. So Ivonne, I hope everybody will have access to this declaration, and disseminate it. Is a declaration that takes the success of Cielo network and proposes to the national research system to promote open science through decentralized system, so that will contribute to development of infrastructure capacities and so on. The second decision that we took is to promote a massive use of artificial intelligence under an ethical approach. So the idea is to contribute to overcome many of the difficulties that we have in the network in terms of a process to get the support of the artificial intelligence. The second decision was to introduce the concept of cost contribution to the cost of a publication in replacement of the article processing charge, because the cost contribution to cost of publication is expected to be used for non-profit situations. Also, journals that really do not have support, but need support from the community. So the idea is that it is non-profit and uses CC BY, and primarily we see the Cielo network. Then, due to the increase of ethical problems, worldwide and also in Cielo network, we established an ethical office to deal in an independent way with the cases of denounces and so on that happens with breaks of ethical. So that it will be very important, because every time you have an ethical problem, you don't know how really to do. So if you have an instance that can approach that, let's say, in an independent and professional and that will help a lot. And you took two major decisions, which is Cielo network is fully decentralized, but the Cielo Brazil work as a kind of a focal group. And we decided to advance the governance of the network to really build the Cielo network as a scholarly open access or open infrastructure. So we will work that on the next 2 or 3 years to improve the network, the governance of Cielo. The second one is the renewal of the Cielo methodology, which is in many ways obsolete, because some of the process as running as we did 25 years ago. So the idea now is to develop the platform, based fully in XML, the entire production of articles, and also to use artificial intelligence. So it's also a 3-year project we are planning. Thank you very much, Ivonne.
Thank you for all this congratulations. And we so we have 5 minutes remaining, but I want to ask this question to Vrushali and Susan. And please be brief in your answer, because we are running out of time to hear your thoughts on this. What more, and this is a question from our director, Joanna Ball. What more can we do in the global community to address the correct assumption that persists in some regions? Open access means low quality. And it's Vrushali or Susan?
Yeah. So I just, as I already mentioned, that more training programs and more more knowledge and workshops are needed, because this is also situation in India where people think that open access means publishing with low quality journals, but maybe with time being these conceptions will be go. So more trainings and more these programs to be needed. And one more thing, that if we bring that local journals, local language journals, if that get indexed in DOAJ type of platform, so that will be really helpful to people to understand the importance of local open access.
I will chime in. Thank you very much. I think that the rigorousness of AGIL's assessment for journals who are applying on a weekly basis from around the continent to join the platform is key. Barriers to entry are barriers to exit, and that's a concept that can be applied here, in that the quality criteria are assessed by an independent entity, very rigorously assessed by AGIL. We do background checks. We do what is termed by us internally as cyber stalking, to make sure that all of the individuals that are stated as being involved in the journal are in fact involved in the journal. We double check in every way. Our assessment process is rigorous for applicant journals, and we also reassess our ongoing journal partners. And we have a system called the JPPS, Journal Publishing Practices and Standards Framework, which was developed with INASP from Oxford in the UK, with input from many hundreds of editors from throughout Africa. That is something that allows for local difficulties as well as international standards of good publishing practices. This kind of system is very, very important to move away from the popularity statistics of metrics like the impact factor, which is ridiculous because it intrinsically benefits the North. So we are moving instead to an assessment system that looks at practices and implementation of those practices rather than stats, which for niche diseases that affect only a few developing countries, for example, are not going to be useful measures. Thank you very much for the question. I'll stop now.
All right, thank you, Susan. And Abel, would you like to add a brief comment on this?
Okay, I think the point is to have open access platforms that is improved in terms of the relevance they have in publishing journals that are edited nationally. These journals are very important in complementing the national production that are published outside. So we need to improve or convince the national research system, national evaluation system, to look the entire scientific production of a country. So that is the point where to go, because the research that are published by these journals are of high importance, because they really deal with local problem, with problems that are related to the sustainable development objectives, and they are mainly written in national or local language. So the issue is not really indicators, but you can use, for example, access indicators, which give an idea of the reading of those, but mainly is a political issue in terms of give relevance to nationally published journals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for highlighting that, Abel, and I think it's really important and applicable for many regions in the world. We are running out of time, and I would like to say thank you to our speakers and of course to our attendees and participants. Thank you very much for being here. I think this event will be informative, and we addressed so many things. I just want to highlight this, what I said at the beginning. Global, it's not always just like a nice word to use or a politically term. It involves many things, challenges and contradictions, and bright and dark sides. And I think we are aware of this. And again, in DOAJ and the sister projects that are here, we are very looking forward to make this community more inclusive and more diverse, and to embrace these ethics of care and these ethics in the scholarly communication endeavors. So I would like to hand over to Tom to just wrap up the webinar and to make some announcements. Tom?
Yes, thank you all. It was a very interesting webinar. I want to thank Yvonne for an excellent guidance, moderation, and the organizers, and also, of course, the sponsors for this event and for the DOAJ. And not in the last place, the whole audience that has been here for almost 2 hours. And it's a good thing to have such a discussion. Yeah, I think I just want to wrap this up by telling you that there is another third event coming up in December. So the whole celebration will consist of 3 events. 2 we have had now. And the next event will be on Trusted. Well, you have seen that DOAJ logo contains Open Global Trusted. So now we will talk about Trusted on the 7th of December. And it will handle subjects like questionable publishing, predatory publishing, as some call it, artificial intelligence, where we have already addressed some of these things today, impact factors, same, special issues, which is a special subject to treat, paper mills. So in all, we need trust. And how can you build trust? If the world of scholarship has seemingly become a game, who do you trust? And you might say, well, trust artificial intelligence to do the trick, but probably it won't work because artificial intelligence is also limited. So let's have a very interesting webinar on the 7th of December and keep the date. Thank you all very much and see you then, hopefully.
Thank you all. Bye.